Everyone in? Okay, looks like. Okay, so first I would just like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Zoom and all of us are on various stolen nations. I am personally in Footscray, so I'm on the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong, the land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I think when you're doing anything around social justice, we really have to have at the forefront of our minds that we are meeting and doing these any kind of activism on stolen lands, and that sovereignty was never ceded, and Indigenous voices should always be the ones that we amplify the most. So first of all, I'd just like to welcome all of the panel members. We've got Maria, who is an academic and advocate who's been working in these spaces across any number of different diversities. We've got Nevo, who's a non-binary activist based, also you're based in Melbourne as well as me, and public speaker, author, all around incredible person. And finally, Bridget, who's from our local, or my sort of local community, Bendigo, who works with the NDIS as well as is a member of our community as well. So I've got a big range of speakers tonight, and I'd like to thank them all for taking their time out of their busy evenings on the wonderful IDAHOBIT day, and happy IDAHOBIT to everyone as well. So yeah, there's so just a bit of housekeeping. For the non-panelists, I'd just ask you to keep your mics off, and we are recording, so if you'd also like to keep your video off, that's okay, I understand as well. And if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat, and I'll keep and monitor the chat as best I can, and we'll have a bit of time at the end, but if I see one that's particularly prescient to whatever we're talking about, I'll slot it in. So with that, I would just like to start with the question that kind of overarches the whole, and I'm going to ask all three of our panelists this one. I don't mind who goes first, but to you, what does being a good ally mean? And does that look different depending on the kind of person, the relationship to the person? So, a parent or an educator or an employer or a politician or a friend, or a library staff member that you meet coming in, and what are the commonalities and what makes good allyship to you? And I guess we'll start with Nevo, maybe, just because you're the one in front of me.
Happy to launch off. I think it's a really, really great question. And I think it's a question that we need to be always asking. I think as soon as we stop asking what makes a good ally, we fail in allyship. And, one of the key things that I always say about allyship is that I don't believe that it's a self-appointed term. I actually don't believe that people get to call themselves allies. It's a little bit like when men introduce themselves at bars as feminists in order to pick up. And I'm a little bit like, well, I'd like to ask your mother, I'd like to ask your ex-girlfriends, I'd like to ask the woman in your share house who does your dishes, like, are you actually a feminist, or are you just presenting yourself in that way? And I find that a lot, especially in corporate sectors, people wearing big ally badges and having, their IDAHOBIT brunches, which is all well and good. But how much are you actually doing for the LGBTIQA plus community? And I think we've seen the corporatization of our community happen more and more in the last few years, that companies realize that it is profitable to be rainbow washing and pink washing their organizations and putting on these sort of ally events. So for me, it's a little bit like, it's kind of like answering a maths problem without any of the working out. I need to see how you got there. I need to see your resume. I need to actually understand what it is that makes you an ally. You don't get to just go to a $2 store, buy a trophy and say you've won an Oscar. I need to really understand what it is that makes you an ally. And I think, I am constantly striving to stand in solidarity with lots of intersectional issues that don't directly affect me, like disability justice, First Nations justice, refugee liberation, and I would never call myself an ally to those issues. I believe that that is a term that would be bestowed upon me if I have earned it by those communities. So I think there are lots of different ways to engage in allyship, but I think one of the primary things is to put our ego aside and to not be centering ourselves within that. You know, our feelings are not more important than the activism that we are trying to stand in solidarity with. You know, there's a lot of people who, you know, make mistakes and misgender people, and that's fine because we're all human, we all make those mistakes. But then to centralize themselves and be like, oh, well, I'm trying really, really hard, this is all just super hard for me, or, you know, give me some credit or something like that. It's like, well, no, because allyship is not just an absence of hatred, it's like a very active engagement. And to be completely honest, I'm not really that interested in allies. I'm much more interested in accomplices. Like, really, I want to know if I'm at a protest and a cop is trying to arrest me, who is going to stand in between me and a police officer? You know, that is the kind of like accomplice allyship that I'm looking for, given our very political history. You know, trans people are experiencing so much violence all the time. Who is going to be there to stand in the middle of that? That's what I'm interested in.
Sorry, I realized I was on mute. So that's brilliant. And I think that, you know, I think it's really important not to, the point about not centering your ego is quite important. As someone who spends a lot of time in other, you know, like you, I try to stand in solidarity with lots of causes, and, you know, being able as well to admit when you're wrong and admit when you stuff up, and not putting yourself at the forefront of any of these issues. So I reckon from there, maybe Bridge, if you could talk specifically as well, maybe about being an ally in a rural area like Bendigo, because I think that comes with its own challenges for all of us, as opposed to all of us city slickers.
Sure does. Yeah, hard act to follow, but I'll try. No, I think being an ally or a person from a marginalised community, whether it's, you know, LGBTI community or disability or Indigenous community, shit's just hard. Ooh, I don't know if I can swear, but I just did. But things are just hard. So, you know, like Nevo was saying, we do rely on those people not to just sit back and be a wallflower. We need people to gather with us and to speak their truth and to be honest and to be outspoken about all of the issues that, you know, affect our marginalised communities as well. So I do a lot of work in the Victoria, New South Wales rural communities. That's where I sort of come from. And it's a forever growing and forever learning place to be. I find that being a good ally, you know, being genuine and willing to learn and willing to educate others once you have learned. I'm really sorry, my cat's just playing with his balls. That's like with his toys, that's the banging you can hear in the background. So yeah, I feel that especially in rural communities, if people are willing to learn and to educate and to acknowledge that, yeah, I've messed up, or yeah, I've done this, I think that, you know, there's no really wrong way, you know, to do that. But yeah, it's, yeah, it can be pretty tough out there as well. So especially in the really rural communities like, you know, your outback New South Wales type of thing. And yeah, the more that people feel comfortable, whether it's through things like this or through Zoom or through online forums, the more people feel comfortable, the, you know, the better the message will be to get out there, I suppose.
Brilliant, thank you. And Maria?
Well, if you don't mind, I might try and be a good ally and pass to Geordie first, because I don't, yeah, this is part of, you know, being last. I'll explain that a bit.
Geordie's not one of the panelists. He's one of our he's one of our staff members. So
okay, well, I just stuffed up badly. I want to agree with everything that Nevo and Bridget said. I think all those points were very important. I get called an ally a lot, and it's very humbling and it's an honor. I do feel that absolutely it's not an identity. It's not an identity you put on yourself. It's something that people give you because of what you've done and what you continue to do. It's also about just adding on, because everything has been said so beautifully. It's also about self-reckoning, and that is what's your heritage? What have you got? What's your privilege? How do you check your privilege? How do you work to undo that privilege? So when I'm working with, say, refugee communities, especially from the Horn of Africa, it's really important to acknowledge that my Italian heritage is actually a colonizer heritage in North Africa. And then we came to Australia, my parents did. And rather than just do the victim trope, you know, the myth of what brought us here, it's also about, yeah, I may not have had English when I went to school, I was working class migrant, but a really bad war and genocide and a stolen generation that my background did to other people is something I have to reckon with. So I think self-reckoning added to everything that Bridget and Nevo have said is really important. It's also about knowing when to step back. Even if you get invited to do things, it's to go, no, that's not my place, and definitely not center your own feelings. You have to be a sounding board sometimes for people to be angry, and that you will stuff up. I'm still learning about pronouns, and I have to say sorry, but it's not about, oh, poor Maria. No, it's about learn, Maria. Get it, you know. So they're the things like when to step forward, when to step back. I am concerned with some ally spaces or LGBTIQA plus spaces where allies take over and suddenly the LGBTIQA plus people aren't there anymore. And I find that really cringy, really embarrassing, awkward.
Yeah, thank you. Sort of, I guess following on from that a little about allyship, the next question, I'm just going to touch on intersectionality, and for the benefit of people who haven't come across that term before, very, very sort of layman's definition here, but it is a sort of political theory that looks at how different combinations of marginalization, you know, for example, around gender, race, sexuality, ability, class, you know, and neurodivergence, alters how a person sort of moves through the world and is perceived by others. And for example, you know, if you take two gay men and one of them is wealthy, cis, white, and living in Melbourne, and the other is, for instance, grows up quite working class and is trans and lives in the middle of, you know, rural New South Wales, they're going to have quite different experiences of life in spite of both being gay men. And, you know, obviously this is a incredibly complicated, you know, political theory to unpack. And this is a very lame, very basic definition, but I thought that it would be important to give that groundwork a little. So the question is, what role do intersections with, you know, other areas of marginalization play within the LGBTIQAA plus community, and how can the wider community and, you know, those within the LGBTQ community ourselves better support those people and celebrate them and help them with and stand in solidarity with them? And I think, Maria, I think this might be a good place for your slides, but if we want to try the technical difficulties, so maybe if you want and risk that. So if you wanted to start with that, that would be great, but it should just be a green share screen button at the bottom.
I'll find it. Share screen, yes. Okay. It's not coming up. So sorry about this. I had it already.
I can try and do it if you want.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got it up. I've got it here, but it's not. I'm so sorry, Saskia.
How's this? Is that coming up?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so because of that, I can't keep an eye on the chat, Geordie. So Geordie, if you could have a look at it, that would be great.
I just wanted to, as I said, for me, it's part of anxiety. I always have this prop. I always have something that I can speak to. And that's just the beginning of it. I guess for me, the intersectionality it's also personal as well as political and professional. It's, you know, as I said, my parents were if it wasn't for allies towards us, and amidst the racism and everything, it would have been incredibly difficult. So I acknowledge those. If we could go back to the second slide, this is, I guess, what I was talking about before, you know, finding out facets of yourself that can connect to the people that we are supporting and allied to without saying, I am like you, or I understand, or I get this, but just finding those points of connection. So for example, you know, when we talk about illegal immigrants, well, they're in my family. They were stowing away on ships to America. You know, so when my grandmother was having an abortion in a village, I understand women's, you know, poverty and women not wanting to have many children and all those sorts of things. Those are the things I've talked about. I think the next one might make that better, might make that understand better. It's meeting people on the borders. It's finding those connections, and it's asking a lot of questions. Rita Khan, Muslim Pakistani incredible leader, talks about non-consensual advocacy. It's asking, what can I do? What don't you want me to do? Where do we connect? Where don't we? What would you like me to learn? What would you like me to understand? And also, you're not going to be my one-on-one educator. I'm actually going to go away and learn this for myself. But I would like you, if you have the energy and the patience, to point out to me when I'm making a terrible mistake, when I'm being offensive. All those things are really important. If you just go to the next slide, thanks, Saskia. I just wanted to put this, you know, what we don't do. I really love Steers Krum talking about allies who behave badly, and Nevo talked about ally fragility. Oh my God, oh, you know, I'm so tired. I'm doing the best I can, rah, rah, rah. You know, it's avoiding non-consensual advocacy. It's, and a bad ally, a bad ally does not apologise for their mistakes, but it doesn't stop at apology, which is what we're having in this country, as you said, with stolen land. It doesn't stop with that. It's action. What are you going to do about it is really important. Don't centre your feelings. Don't speak for, speak with, or speak from the sidelines. There are times when I'm asked, especially because I don't understand and I haven't lived certain, you know, I'm working on a Mobs and Wogs project at the moment. I haven't lived being Indigenous. So what can I do from the sideline that I don't even have to be named? It doesn't matter. I am there to support in whatever way. The other thing that I get, especially when we're talking about intersectionality, especially when I'm working with refugee or Indigenous communities, the number of times the researcher or the ally goes into the person's home, but there is never an invitation back. You are welcome in my home. You are welcome into my space. You are welcome to interrogate the way I live. You're welcome to ask questions of my privileges and my limitations. So this idea that an ally can walk away comfortably when it gets all too hard, rather than go, I don't understand that, I don't live that, here's something that I've experienced, how do we connect? And if it's not my place, then you will tell me and I will accept that. I don't like the idea, and I think Nevo was saying this, when it all gets too hard or uncomfortable, someone walks away. If you don't understand something, but you want to be an active ally and an accomplice, it means that you are going to be uncomfortable, you are going to be unsettled, and you're going to lose friends, and you might get your car scratched, and you're going to get death letters in the mail sometimes. Sorry, everyone. I'm now speaking from lived experience without censoring it. You know, that's just part of what we do. And we can all be allies to everyone else, but also know when not to speak up. Oh, that's just my little cutie thing that I love. I think we need to be realistic. And this is why I said, you know, it can't stop at recognition and respect. It's what are we going to do to reconstruct and decolonize and actually help create something better, but in a supportive cheerleader role, not in a, hey, look at me, I'm leading this role. Thank you, Saskia.
Yeah, I think that comment about the academia really hits home, because I'm currently enrolled in one of the more egregious right-wing institutions, Melbourne Uni, that's still got buildings named after eugenicists, and it's there, particularly in the socio-political department. There's a lot of let's treat, you know, marginalized communities as a subject matter, and like they're not real people that have real feelings and real struggles that, you know, need to be examined. And it's definitely an issue that's very ongoing, and I notice it all the time. And you know, a lot of old academics that have been around and just don't care anymore to learn or change. But particularly on the subject of, you know, I'm going to ask this question, you know, this questions are open for everyone, but I just wanted to bring Bridget in here to talk about the intersection of being any kind of marginalized, but particularly LGBTIQ, and living in a rural area. Because I know from my experience, the reason I, you know, am at Goldfields is because I grew up in that area, and it is kind of unique compared to the friends and, you know, partners and things that I've had in Melbourne that, you know, are LGBTIQ, because you don't have that community around you a lot of the time. So because of the population size in a lot of these places. So I was just wondering if you could talk about what that means.
Yes, certainly. Actually, today during the flag raising ceremony at the Bendigo Library, you know, there was a comment made about when, you know, you are a part of the LGBTI community, you're not born, you know, into your family. You have to find your tribe. And I thought that just really resonated with me. You know, finding the people that you can connect with, because you know, when you're born this way, it's often, you know, you can be scared of your family and you can be scared of your friends, especially when you're going against that grain as well, being a part of a diverse community in a very rural or small-minded community, I suppose. Coming from my background, which is aged care and disability, the whole thing is to build capacity of people. You know, it's a tale as old as time. You build, you know, you show someone to fish and then they can feed themselves forever. Whereas, you know, if you do things for people, it's not building capacity, it's not engaging people to be self-sufficient, which is really what, you know, the feedback that we've had from working in rural communities for over 45 years, my organisation. You know, that's what they want. They don't want people coming in and saying, well, this is what you need. You know, from our perspective, I feel that, you know, this community needs this and you need that. And we know how to get it, and we'll go in there and we'll make a big fuss and we'll put all of the things in place, and then they're gone. You know, and it could be whether, you know, the LGBTI community, like I said, the Indigenous community, people living with disability. You know, you need to be able to take people for their word that they know what is best for them, and you need to trust that. And, you know, you can't go overpowering them and saying, well, I definitely know what you need, because it's just not true. Sure, people might need some guidance, you know, and that's where, you know, your elders in the community and finding that family, like I said earlier, that's where that's important, so you can make your own educated guess, your own decision. If it's the wrong one, then it's the wrong decision that you've made. Like I said, you own it, but at least it was your decision and your mistake to make. Someone else wasn't doing that for you. So I feel like empowering smaller communities and marginalised people and marginalised communities is, like I said, where it's at. And everything that, you know, Maria said earlier, it just hit me real close, because it's also true. But yeah, like I said, it's an onion out there. There's lots of layers and lots of different things, and people have a lot of things going on and a lot of identities. And I think that the best thing that we can do is to be there for people, be honest, and try not to take over. Let people make their own decisions, let people make their own mistakes. and, you know, let them just be themselves.
Brilliant, thank you. And Nevo, I guess lucky last on this one. You know, I know you, as well as I, spend a lot of time in advocacy circles, in in activist circles for many different causes. And I think that what your take on, particularly, you know, in the wake of a lot of upheavals around, you know, Black Lives Matter, or the current conflict in Palestine, all of these issues and their way that they intersect with other issues within our community are really important. And I was wondering if you had any insights on that.
Yeah, sure. You know, I think really recognizing the similarities in the machinations of power and how it is reinforced over and over again through different groups. I mean, the struggle of trans people is not exclusive to trans people, really. I mean, it is the same oppressive forces that hold trans people from our fullest and biggest potential as it is that holds disabled people back, and people of color, and queer people, refugees, you know, like all different intersections are held back by the same kinds of oppressive forces. And we can see those same machines of power reinforcing that over and over again. And I think that that's really clear in Palestine at the moment. And I send all of my love and solidarity to Palestinians who might be watching or listening. And I think that that's a really painful but good example of how these same systems are reinforced across the world in different versions of each other. And yeah, I mean, it's really complicated. It's a complicated thing to identify. I feel like once you start seeing the world through that lens and you start understanding those axes of oppression and privilege, like things look really, really different, you know. And when people say like, oh, you're always talking about trans stuff, everything is transphobic, it's like, well, yeah, it is, you know. Like my housemate, who is an anti-racist worker, is like constantly told, you make everything about race. And she's like, everything is about race. And once you start to realize that and you start to really see the world that way, it changes a lot of the approaches that we have. And I think what Maria said was really pertinent as well, of like, really, I think one of the key things that we can do as allies, or in decolonizing or in understanding our world, is really meeting ourselves, really understanding ourselves, our history, our ancestry, grappling with where it is on privilege and oppression axes that we exist on, so that we understand what our responsibilities are and how to redistribute that power as much as possible, how to redistribute that wealth, that intergenerational wealth that so many of us on stolen land are not actually entitled to, that has come off the backs of slavery and genocide. There is so much history that we need to understand and unravel and grapple with, and so much healing that can be done through that. You know, I mentioned in the chat to Maria that I have this amazing podcast that is about healing your European ancestry and understanding the sort of the ways that colonization has, or the history pre-colonization for colonizers, which is something I've not really thought about very much before, but it was talking about the traumas that people in Europe would have experienced that would have led to some of those actions down the road, and what it means to kind of heal that and to break that cycle within our own lineage. And I know that talking about ancestry and spirituality and whatever, some people are like, oh yeah, whatever. But like, there are very real, tangible examples of intergenerational trauma in our DNA, like that has been scientifically proven, you know? So I know that I live every day with intergenerational trauma in my body as a Jewish person, and as a trans person, honestly. And I think healing that and wanting to break that cycle at my generation and my lifetime is a really important part of intersectionality, and standing in solidarity with others is really knowing where in my history I have come from and where I want to be.
Thank you. I don't want you to feel like I'm pushing you to answer questions again, but the next one that I had was, you know, I'm sure we've all heard the myth from various, you know, conservative comment sections and things saying, you know, you've got marriage equality now, it's all over, it's all good, which I'm fairly sure most people here would know is false. But what challenges do you think are still in front of our community? And in particular, Nevo, what does the youth activist space or the activist space look like, other than the bickering mess that it often is?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. And as a marriage celebrant, I would be happy to report from my work that homophobia, transphobia, interphobia is all solved through marriage. It's all good. I've found that with all my clients, no problem. We're done. We can pack up shop. It's all good. The same way that, interracial marriage has solved racism around the world. Where we don't need to deal with this stuff anymore. And I think it's a really good example of what happens when we do cater to the most privileged of a community, rather than lifting from the very roots and finding the most marginalized people, catering to them, and then realizing that everyone comes with that. That was a really beautiful thing that Tuesday actually said on a panel in Casey recently that I was chairing. They said this beautiful quote, that a rising tide carries all ships to the shore. And I think that that's really, really important, that when we do focus on the most marginalized people in any community and we liberate them, we bring everyone else with us. But for as long as we're only focusing on upper middle class gay white men who want to get married and have a white picket fence and 2.5 average kids, we will never be liberating the other people who have always been eclipsed in these issues. And that is the same when it comes to feminism. If we are only focused on breaking the glass ceiling of white feminism, we're not thinking about the people that are trapped in the dungeon underneath, and I think that is a very real thing that we need to be grappling with. I think, there are really big issues that we're dealing with now. To me, as someone who's written a book about pronouns, I feel like pronouns is sort of the next pinnacle after marriage equality. It's almost the next, if we solve this, everything will be done. And the reality is that it's a vehicle. It is a vehicle for the liberation of lots of issues. But the truth is, I don't think that a lot of trans homeless youth would care so much about what pronouns are used for them if they're being handed keys to stable housing, or access to healthcare or employment, or some of the really big, huge issues that we're dealing with. That's not to say that pronouns aren't important, because obviously I think they really, really are. But we are dealing with some very big issues that our community is faced with. And, I think that whole it's all solved now, is really funny, because I just think people don't realize, they really have no idea what's going on the ground, and that we have, 1 in 2 trans young people have attempted suicide, 48.1%, that's a statistic, but that's my friends, that's my community, and so when we're talking about this political correctness gone mad, or a left-wing fad going off, whatever, we're not actually considering that this isn't about political correctness or oversensitivity. It's people's lives. It is literally people's lives at stake. So I think young people are doing some really incredible activism in this space. I trust our future in the hands of young people more than the hands of older people, I'm afraid. And I also believe that, kids aren't, young people aren't the future. I think they are the right now. I think their voices are incredibly important. I think they have a lot to say and a lot to offer. I run a lot of writing workshops and various speeches with teenagers, and I learn so much from them every time. I think they are brilliant and so switched on and so politically aware. And I'm seeing a lot of really incredible organizing in that space. I recently had the privilege of interviewing Jean Hinchliffe in Warrnambool, and she is one of the key organizers of the School Strikes for Climate. She's 17 years old. She's just released a book. It's brilliant. It's like a 101 guidebook of how to get involved in organizing and activism. And she's just she's such a boss, and that is the reality for so many teens. They're really hardcore, they're really cool, and they really need us to believe in their voices and their power.
Thank you. I think it's really important. It's one of the things I find when people talk about those statistics. It's those people they're not just numbers. They're the girls that I go out and have fun with, and go and see plays with. And it's important not to see it through the lens of 40-year-old white cis gay men who have 2 pugs in South Melbourne. But I'd probably like to bring Maria into this one as well, because I think you sort of do a lot of work with younger people as well in various marginalized communities, and you probably, you know, you'd have a bit of knowledge about where it's sort of going and whether we can just be optimistic.
I think it's what I put on that slide. We've got to meet on the borders. Like, if you are a white gay man married with, you know, pets or whatever, you know, your family, you have absolutely every right to that, but you also have a responsibility and an accountability to know that other people in the LGBTIQAA+ community and may not have those privileges. So for me, it's about being on the borders of, okay, what did happen to our older members, our older communities to get to where we are? But we also have to respect that young people are starting at this incredible base, which everyone who's older works so hard to get here. So now we have to follow young people into the future and say, well, you know, how are they going to see the world? As Neville said, where are they going to go with this? So, and, you know, what I find really difficult within cultural communities, faith communities, and the LGBTIQA+ community as a guest is when those, you know, Paulo Freire said the oppressed can often become oppressive. You know, I struggle with people who gain some power in this intersectionality who then forget, they get this historical amnesia. They forget what they went through. They forget what their communities went through and begin to oppress others. Like, I don't understand how feminism, which for me was about removing the biological, you know, those binary constructs, how suddenly TERFs have got such a strong voice when it was all about removing the connection between biology and gender expression or gender presentation. So I think and for me also then coming from a European background, knowing what my families went through as Southern Europeans, we were once called blacks in Australia. We were the black Italians, believe it or not. And now these communities can be so racist and religiously bigoted towards emerging and newer communities. So we're all on the borders, and also being gay and lesbian are obviously important identities, but what about fluidities? What about everybody else's sexualities, everybody else's genders? And I don't like this line I hear sometimes from white feminists or, oh, you know, it's because of us, because you've come into the West, you have all these freedoms, you have, you know, pre-colonial societies had very diverse, pre-Christian societies had very diverse ways of being. So I think on those borders between younger, older, oppression and oppressor, we've got to really, as Nevo and Bridget are saying, we've got to really look at those complexities and enjoy the freedoms, but with those freedoms comes accountability to the next generation, to the next community. It's not all done just because it's all done for you. Like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, brilliant. And Bridge, I know you've talked about empowering community, particularly small rural communities. And maybe along this line, what does that space look like? Because I imagine it would look very different to an organising meeting for a climate strike. So, yeah. So, what are the differences you've noticed, and where can we go, and how can we better support people who are doing that kind of work?
Absolutely. The one thing that comes straight to mind is walking into a pub in rural Victoria. You know, I met up with some people from my community there. You know, they're like, come down to the pub, it'll be great. I'm like, excellent, let's go. You know, we all walked in there. You know, I had a shaved head and my docs on. You know, there's people with their flags and their rainbows. We had to walk past about 8 gentlemen sitting at the pub. It was their regular pub, and it was amazing because we walked through and I thought, oh, here we go. This is going to be great. You know, I was expecting, you know, some tensions to be high, and through the work through the neighbourhood house community and through some other organisations, you know, the men who, you know, they turned around and they're like, oh, hey, so-and-so, oh, hey, you know, how's this, how's that? love your rainbow. And it was genuine as well. And it surprised me as well. I think small communities have a really, really good, they've got a really good passion and ethos and understanding when they get it right, I suppose. And that also does come along with the education and the willingness to learn, to be equitable and to really manage your bias and to really understand it and move forward from it as well. And even telling this story, you know, thinking back, I'm like, oh, well, I have my own bias, sort of walking into that pub thinking, oh, you know, this is definitely the outcome that's going to happen. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that. So I really think that with the challenges in the smaller communities, it is about being persistent and being seen and being heard, and supporting those people in those areas to make those decisions for themselves.
Brilliant, thank you. I would also just like to add, because I'm just keeping an eye on the chat, and we've been talking about where to find the pronoun lowdown, the book, and we do have it in the library, but as colonial as it is, the Dewey Decimal System is good, because if you find one book, all the rest of them will be there. But it makes you realize that it was definitely written by old white Victorian guys, because there's 100 numbers for technical things and like literature, but there's 2 numbers that cover both women's issues, Indigenous issues, and queer issues. So needs some work, and there's some amazing librarians out there that are trying to create decolonial systems. Very interesting, but I'm a nerd about that sort of thing. So, but yeah, if you find, it should be in the 306-ish. There will be books and things in any library, and you'll be able to find information there, particularly to Katie, who was talking about it in the chat. So my next question, I think it sort of leads on from that, a bit of what Nevo was saying, where it's a bit earlier, in that there's a lot of people out there that are, you know, they mean well. They don't necessarily, you know, they're not walking around with bigoted placards, and you know, they want to be allies and they want to stand in solidarity with our communities, but they may not have either an academic or a lived experience of what these struggles entail, and you know, they may not have the vocabulary. You know, this question was born out of working with the facilitator of the workshops that we made those videos with, and she was, you know, middle-aged, cis, heterosexual, never come across any of these words. And you know, we were talking about things like the split attraction model, or you know, gender spectrums, or you know, as genders being assigned at birth. And it was just, you know, she didn't know those words, and she, you know, when we had to sit down and explain them to her. But I think the question is, how can those people who do want to know more find out more without being one of those draining, exhausting people that, you know, expects a lot of free emotional labor from the friend that they know that might be gay, or might be a person of color, or might be neurodivergent, and bombards them with questions without, you know, without checking in first. So where's the best place to find that information, and what's the best way to ask for it from members of a marginalized community? So might start with Nevo here.
Yeah, can I jump in? I think this is where social media is a great and deep gift. There is so many incredible content creators out there on Instagram, on TikTok. Honestly, like I'm not getting on TikTok. I've got enough social media. I do not want to be addicted to another platform. And I have to say, I'm on TikTok and I really enjoy it, and I'm getting a lot out of it. I have time limits on how long I can be on there, but you know, I think there are a lot of incredible creators who are very generously sharing their insights and their stories on social media. And I think a really big part of engaging with this stuff is actually looking at your social media feed, and are you only looking at the same types of people all the time, which is not good for them, but also just not good for you. It's actually not good to be constantly only seeing white, cis, able-bodied, skinny people all the time, because it makes it so much harder to imagine yourself anywhere. It feeds into the disgustingly fat-phobic society that we live in, where we're constantly modeling our beauty standards based on Western colonial fat-phobic beauty standards and ableist beauty standards. And I think really changing the way that you engage with that stuff is really useful. And also just recognizing that that stuff is out there. Like, as someone who creates that kind of content, as someone who does these workshops in workplaces all the time, we are constantly writing books, making videos, putting things on social media. Like, it is there. And whenever I get questions, I mean, when I get questions within my workshops, it's very different, because I am there as an educator. I am there to create a safe space for people to ask questions, whether they're asked in the right way or not is irrelevant. I am there to walk them through and hold their hand through this process. And I think that that is really important. In saying that, in my personal life, when I receive those kinds of questions, and often they're framed as like, bet you've never gotten this typical question that you've gotten 500,000 times. And it's like, this is so basic. Like, this is actually so 101 that really you could Google this. Like, I know people just say, just Google it, but it's like, what are pronouns, or like how do I use they, them, or whatever? It's like, you can Google that. You really, really can. It's really straightforward. Or you can go on social media, look up activists who are doing this. I mean, just type in top non-binary influencers or something, and there are BuzzFeed lists. Like, it's not that hard to find us. We're there. And then look at who follows those people and follow them. If you're not on social media, you know, there's heaps of articles. Again, a shameless plug, but like, I have 2 books that I've written that are resources in this area. They also have glossaries at the back of both of them. They also have reading lists and resources in them, so that they can be jumping off guidelines for where to go next. So my new book, The Pronoun Lowdown, has TV, movie, and books that I recommend that I think are great representations, as well as other resources across the world if you're in need of support or help or anything like that. We are creating this content all the time. And then, you know, if you want to have a conversation with someone in person and you feel like you learn best from that, I think autonomy and consent are the most important aspects. So, you know, really recognizing the emotional labor that you're demanding of someone, gently asking them, hey, I have a question. I'm wondering if you have the space or capacity to answer it right now. Totally fine if not. If I get a question like that in my personal life, more often than not, I'm like, thank you for recognizing how deeply emotional this can be and how much this is work. I'm more than happy to answer it. And then sometimes I get those questions on Instagram and I'm like, I actually do consultation for $150 an hour. You are more than welcome to get your business to book me for consultation. This is not a question I'm going to answer for free. And that has really helped me value my own time and my own labor by actually charging for the work that I do and being like, yep, this is a service I offer. Here it is on my website. You know, you want to ask the same questions over and over again? I'm going to charge money for it, you know? But really, nowadays, there is so much out there. You can't ask that. Like YouTube, people are making so much. You just need to be curious and you need to want to know the answer and not get it in the easiest way possible, I think.
Yeah, and I think also some of the things that I think is important too is if you are badgering your, you know, if you are asking a friend, sometimes compensation for that labor is important. You know, you mentioned paying, you know, saying it was quite revelatory to start charging people for that. And, you know, if you are doing it, maybe
buy them lunch, buy them lunch, you know, just be like, hey, I would love to go out for brunch and like talk about some of your experience.
And it's my shout, and you know,
I'll do a lunch. That sounds great.
And I guess I'd probably bring in Maria here on this one as well.
Again, TikTok for Nevo. I guess also sometimes this is where an ally can be quite useful, rather than pestering someone, an LGBTIQA plus person, pester another ally, like another ally who may have a better understanding or can direct you to some of these resources and places, you know, like have that conversation, and with another ally, you can have that conversation of, you know, this is something you really should know. Like before you decide that you're going to, you know, raise a flag or do whatever, you just go away and do some learning. That's the kind of conversation I would have with other people who are privileged. I think also, Saskia, you talked before about academia. I think a responsibility that we have is to make our work accessible, to do what Nevo and Bridget are saying, like, you know, have community conversations, go to places where people can chat, watch something together, read something that will give you a lovely glossary or give you a personal story or some photos or images. And, you know, and I think academia, this is where I guess I've got into trouble quite a bit in academia, because for me, a lot of that is very elitist. It is written for certain people, and there's a very heteropatriarchal system, as you said, Saskia, still in place. So I think those of us who are working in those spaces also have to be accomplices in challenging those spaces. However, having said that, some of us are more privileged than others. If you're in a precarious employment situation and you're a much younger person, you know, it's again the responsibility of those of us who are older, who may have a little bit more privilege in that institution, to do some of that. I wouldn't expect someone who's working really hard to keep a job from month to month in a contract situation to have to put their jobs at risk, but others can put their work at risk. So it's those real fine situations. It's out there, and the conversations are out there.
Yeah, and Bridge, I think it'd be important as well to talk about people who are in those really remote communities where, you know, maybe the internet doesn't even work a lot of the time. I mean, even in Castlemaine where I grew up, it was pretty shoddy. So how can those people access things?
Absolutely. Internet is a difficult thing, and also sometimes, you know, the libraries aren't, you know, or the resources that are available in more rural communities. It's, you know, you're reading books from very outdated times and places. So I feel that that's where, when people, you know, do check their privilege and they can maybe move from the city through these communities, bring their knowledge with them, share their knowledge, visit the places that they need to visit your local neighbourhood houses, get out into the library, share the information, share the knowledge, but also be wary and, yeah, check your privilege around respecting other people's, you know, their knowledge, and, you know, not pester them, and make sure that you are respectful of that, and you are respecting their boundaries as well. But definitely I feel like the information sharing is there, and if you are in a place where you are happy to share that information, you know, please do so with the widest brushstrokes that you can, because there are people out there who are severely in need of this knowledge, and who, yeah, would love to hear about it.
So, yeah, thank you. So I think before I go into the last question, which will have to be quite brief, we've got a question in the chat from Kath at the library that I can tell is asked from experience, because I've experienced this too. What advice would you give to organisations that are trying to become more welcoming spaces like libraries when you have staff that have a full spectrum of beliefs, which is a very diplomatic way of putting it? Nevo?
I can jump in, because I do this sort of professional development in workplaces. I think that having an educator to come in and run workshops is really important. I think that, you know, I mean, I have a lot of places that will get me in for IDAHOBIT or Wear It Purple or whatever, tick the box, and they're like, great, we've done the thing. But I think there is so much deeper that we can go in, like a 3-hour workshop, for example, where there is peer-to-peer learning, it's strength-based approaches. You get to understand where people are actually at, and you get to offer the space for some really deep healing and sitting in those feelings, because I really believe that when people are willfully ignorant or angry or homophobic or whatever, I think it comes from a really deep place of hurt. I think more often than not, it comes from, you know, as I said, like, I don't believe that these kinds of gender barriers and these stereotypes and restrictions are liberating for anyone. And I think that we, across our lifetime, spend a lot of time shaving down parts of ourselves in order to fit into these really rigid boxes, to the point where we don't even recognize those parts of ourselves anymore because we got rid of them so long ago. And then I think when we fit suddenly or finally inside these cages, and we're looking out at people frolicking in the field with their rainbow flags and living their truth and doing whatever they want, it makes us really angry, because we're like, well, why did I have to spend my whole life trying to not have emotions and be a breadwinner and do all this stuff when you get to just be free? And to that, I feel really sad. You know, I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, you shouldn't have had to do that. And that's also oppressive. And that is, you know, a big part of why male suicide rates are as high as they are, why male violence is as high as it is. Like, I think that this stems from a deep repression of all of our authenticity and our full selves. So I think having the spaciousness within a workplace to actually grapple with some of that stuff is really important, and actually get to the root of some of that stuff. And then I also think if you want to be a progressive organization who actually believes in this stuff, then you need to have very clear disciplinary measures if people do not subscribe to it. It is a legal right for people to not be discriminated in the workplace. The 2013 Sex Act Amendment made it legally, federally illegal to discriminate people based on their gender, their sexuality, or their intersex status. If you still do that in a workplace, you should be fired. And it shouldn't be and you know, how do we grapple with these people? You know, if they are willfully ignorant and you have tried time and time again to educate them and they are causing harm, they should be fired. You know, and I know that like individuals within a library might not have as much power as the administration, but if the organization is trying to move towards that, you've done all the things you can, you've tried all the things you can, you've issued warnings, and it has still continued, there needs to be disciplinary measures in place, because then it's not the safe space people are acting like it is.
I think you've answered that brilliantly. I'm going to have to move on to the last one because I'm very conscious that we've got 3 minutes left. So I guess the last question is, answer briefly if you can, but what gives you hope for the community and for the future, and even in the midst of a lot of horrible things happening in the world and the steady march of climate change? But yeah, so you could go over time a little bit. The Zoom won't just cut out at 7, but I think we've got till 8, Geordie's telling me. But, you know, yeah, so what gives you hope?
Can I start as someone sitting at 60 years of age? Despite cycles of discrimination, cycles of prejudice, I am seeing exponential shifts, and I'm seeing growth. I'm seeing laws passed. I'm seeing younger people coming in, beginning from a very different baseline, which rolls up some older people. Like, they're asking why was that like that? Why do we have to, why can't it be? I'm seeing young people taking action in schools and driving change in schools, which is brilliant. I'm seeing people just personal connections, you know, just mixing and just being. So I'm seeing a lot of personal interactions, personal engagement, political change. So I actually have a lot of hope for the future. And I probably won't live to see all the amazing things, but I've seen a lot. I've seen where we've come from. And in a lot of situations, it is actually getting incredibly better in some. I can't speak internationally, but in Australia, and I also know internationally, though, there are some very important moves on the ground. Things are changing.
Bridget, what about you?
Yeah, some of the best change I've seen is the small changes, is when, you know, you see that light bulb literally go off in someone's head and you think, oh, there they are. They've just understood what I've been banging on about for the last 3 years, or the past 40 minutes in this presentation, or the past whatever. You can literally see the change on someone's face when they've realized, they've understood, they've acknowledged. You can see it's a really powerful thing. And yeah, that definitely gives me hope, is the small changes and the small wins, I think, because there are some big wins which are absolutely amazing, but sometimes those day-to-day wins are what you need to sort of keep you moving through.
Yeah, I definitely echo both of those sentiments in a big way. And even in a shorter span of time than Maria, perhaps, I have seen so much exponential change. I mean, I came out as trans in 2013, and even though it's really not that long ago, as far as the socio-political climate, the cultural zeitgeist goes, I mean, it is completely different. I had no trans representation growing up whatsoever. And as I was watching the Netflix documentary Disclosure about half a year ago, it occurred to me that I am part of the last generation of trans people to grow up without representation. And that just like really hit me in such a strong way. I mean, obviously access to television and movies and all of that stuff changes depending on where you are, but that really hit me so hard because I'm only 25, you know, I'm very young, and it was just a really momentous realization for me, because I just don't think anyone should have to grow up and not see themselves represented. So I feel really hopeful in that regard.
Brilliant, thank you. So it was almost perfectly timed, everyone. So I'd just like to say on behalf of Goldfields, thank you so much to our three presenters, as well as everyone who came in. And for those that are here, this has been recorded, so we'll post it online, and anyone who wants to watch it, it's available. And yeah, so thank you so much for the conversation for everyone. And I've posted some of your book links in the chat, Nevo, so that you've got some plugs. And yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me on. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Happy IDAHOBIT.
Yes, happy IDAHOBIT.
And thanks for the great questions, Saskia. Brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It's been a great day. Thanks, everyone.
All right, I guess I'll